everybody. Welcome to tonight's Central Texas Mycological Society guest lecture, which actually tonight won't be a guest lecture. It's going to be me. My name is Philip Balke. I'm the Central Texas Mycological President and one of the founding organizers here. Sorry, got to adjust my microphone. Um, Tonight I will be presenting about mycology in the garden, kind of giving a brief overview of the fungal ecology and the lifestyle of fungi, and then we're going to kind of get into soil itself, um, and kind of like on a macro scale, broad scale. Working with the soil, and then we'll kind of get into some techniques for doing that in our backyards and on our small home scale, that we can kind of build the relationship with the land that way, as well as like trying to organize our society to be more in tune with the soil ecology. So without further ado, I'm gonna get this started. I'm gonna share here. Awesome. Okay. Cool. And we can change slides. So, like I said, we're going to start off with a brief overview of the fungal lifestyle. And yeah, so as you see here, we have a pretty rough sketch, a basic sketch of the sorry, just notice you can't see me on the screen, but oh well, we're going to have to bear with it, power through. Yeah, so what we have here on the screen is a basic outline of the fungal life cycle, where we can start. Oh, good. You can see my cursor on the screen too. So we're all familiar with mushrooms right now in Central Texas. We're getting some cool weather and some rain, so we're starting to see little mushrooms pop up. So like, what are these mushrooms? They are the spore-producing bodies, the spore-bearing features of fungi. They take many shapes and forms. We're most familiar with the cap and stem that's pictured here. And you can see right underneath of it, it is dispersing its spores. Let's see, we'll go to the next slide. So spores are a unicellular unit with specialized adaptations to protect the cell from environmental conditions until conditions favor growth. They are kind of like the seed to a plant, if you will, and the mushroom is the apple. So they have, and like on the last slide, it said they have half of the fungal's genetic information in there. So these spores, they get out of the air, they're picked up by insects, or they're dropped in, spread around by water. But yeah, like I said, they get picked up into the air, and they fly around. They can actually travel pretty far. There's been some studies, demonstrating measuring how far they'll fly, and they've been known to go all around the world, especially when they get picked up in some of these larger atmospheric, the jet stream and such. And another function that these spores do, as well as other dust particles and bacterium, they act as nuclei sites for clouds to start forming. So they're important in that hydrological cycle. And so whenever the conditions are right for that precipitation that forms around these nuclei, these cloud nuclei, these spores, they fall out to the ground and they land on a suitable habitat. Sometimes this is in the soil, sometimes this is on wood, and then they will germinate right here, and they will germinate in that first little bit of germination, that single tube that you can kind of see right here. I'm circling it with my cursor. That is called a hyphae. That is a single strand is a filamentous tubular cell of the fungi. These hyphal tubes are only one cell thick, with a diameter of 10 micrometers. or 1/100th of a millimeter. So it's very, very small. And some fungi evolved septa, which in this photo here you can see um, this little line that my cursor is circling. That is a septa. That is a porous uh, a porous feature in the cell wall that closes off the hyphae in case of damage, and that'll become important in as we get into later to keep in mind is that septa that closes up when the fungal cells are damaged and keep all the cytoplasm and other intracellular bits and pieces to not float out of the cell. Um, so like I mentioned that they have a cell wall, which is really important feature of their protection. It's made out of proteins and beta glucan and chitin, which is that chitin in particular is a very important reason why we must cook our mushrooms. But that beta glucan is also a reason why all fungi have a really a, like a cholesterol reducing not reducing, but what's the right word? Like mitigating effect. Like it kind of buffers cholesterol in the body and helps us produce the good kind of cholesterol as opposed to the harmful kind. But it's very important to break up that chitinous cell wall, or else all the other proteins and other good molecules that are mixed in with the into the cell wall and inside the fungus itself are going to be locked away. Excuse me. So at the tip of the hyphae is called what is called the SpritzinCorpor, which I think that slide is actually wrong. That it's not named after the person. It's like a German word for what. Oh, you can barely read it on this thing, but it's just it's a very complex feature of the fungus where it kind of is the point of nutrient exchange, where the fungus is exuding enzymes out into its environment, um, and it is exuding um, the enzymes out into his environment to break down molecules that are um, used for digestion, and then this is also where they take up nutrients, um, and uh, what's really interesting is the fungi, like they take in nutrients at this point, but they also, like, this point is very porous and very uh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very it lasts. It's very like it's not as solid as the rest of the the fungus is, as the rest of the hyphae are, because it's constantly taking in nutrients and putting it out. And so it's actually kind of amazing that they don't lose all. There's so much water pressure from all the mycelium inside the the there's so much water pressure inside the hyphae that that it's amazing that it doesn't kind of burst out, and that might be kind of a feature of the physics of the water that kind of keeps it from doing that, and the size of the fungus. But it's a very active place in the mycelium. And I noticed there's a question from the chat, and I'm going to go back to answer this question. The spores actually last a long time because they are waiting around for that environment to be right. And if you're storing them, you can kind of like keep them cool in a cool, dry place, and that'll be good. Um, but yeah, so like I said, the SpritzinCorpor is a very robust and movement heavy place of the fungi, where this is where all the action happens and where the active growth happens and branching is. So you can kind of see it happening here. So as the individual hyphae grow and branch throughout its environment, it'll eventually will meet up with uh, another spore, another hyphal network of its type, and then it'll go through what's called plasmagamy, and which is just a fancy word for meaning that they share plasma now, and then they form what is called mycelium. Mycelium is the collective term for hyphae, and it grows pretty much the same way, carrying out much of the same processes as the single strain of Hyphae does. Um, and then, but when the proper conditions occur, the mycelium starts to organize itself into a denser mat and start to form a mushroom where the spores come from. And so you can kind of this cartoon doesn't have a really good depiction of that process happening, but at a certain point, the the mycelial network will reach its full uh, limits inside the substrate, and it won't be able to reach out anymore. Um, which is kind of an interesting fact about the fungi, is that um, if if it's able to, it will just kind of grow indefinitely, and that's kind of how we are able to then cultivate it later. Uh, yeah, that's what enables us to cultivate it and keep a single strain of fungi around and use that one over and over and over again, so we to know what we're going to be getting um, when we're cultivating. All right, and so this is a picture of some mushrooms that are fruiting, some jack-o'-lanterns that I took. So there are several different kinds of fungi. There are um, yeah, we're gonna be switching over to fungal ecology. So there are several different kinds of fungi. The ones that we're really familiar with are the saprophytic fungi, which is saprophytic just means eating dead things. Um, and so they're decomposer fungi. They're responsible for breaking down all the leaves in the forest, any logs, uh, anything like that. They are responsible for breaking them down and returning those complex nutrients into a more bioavailable form. And they're the only organisms that have the chemical ability to do that. Um, so like I mentioned, there are two types of rotting fungi. There are the white rot fungi, which are like I have pictured here, the oyster mushrooms, um, as an example of those, and they are digesting lignin in the wood. Um, and in the brown rot fungi, and basically the difference between the brown rot and the white rot is the different chemical actions and the parts of the wood that they're breaking down. And if we were doing a talk about fungi and trees, which I really want to do sometime in the future, uh, and how to prune your trees for mushroom cultivation so you don't hurt your trees, and but still get plenty of logs for mushroom cultivation. Yeah, um, but yeah, so there are the brown rot fungi. They digest cellulose and hemicellulose, which are um, just some other molecules that make up the structure of wood. There are also parasitic fungi. So phytopathology, which are just fungi that infect plants. Um, they are some of the most prolific agricultural pests, and that's where a lot of people who study fungi, that's where a lot of their time is spent, because economics kind of drives them to be studying those things, because agriculture is a huge part of our economy and also just kind of how we survive as human beings. But some other interesting fungi that are uh, that are that are plant parasites are the fungus humungus, the Armillaria oistiae, which is in I should have brushed up on where this is located. I'm pretty sure it's in Oregon, but if you just Google humongous fungus, you will learn a little bit more about this. And it is a giant fungus a mycelial mat that grows on a mountaintop and is the world's largest living organism. It's also one of the world's oldest organisms because like I said earlier, it's just been able to grow and find new food and keep finding new food. So this one organism has just been kind of moving throughout its environment, and digesting and taking down trees, and it's pretty amazing stuff. We got a link to it in the chat. Let's see if I can pull this up. We're working on the fly here. Oh, there it goes. It's working. Let's see. It is in the Mueller National Forest. Mailer National Forest? I don't know. in Oregon. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Um, yeah, it's amazing. But another one that's really another important parasitic fungi that attacks plants that is really important to be aware of around here is the oak wilt fungi, and it's actually spread around by a beetle. But when you prune your trees, you need to make sure to either prune outside the season of this beetle, which is I should have looked this up before too. I also should know this off the top of my head. Um, I'm gonna just say February through through July. That's when you we need to be careful about pruning your trees. Just kind of avoid it, or if you do have to prune, you need to cover up your wound with something. Then, um, yeah, right. I hope the humongous fungus isn't on fire. I'm not sure. I haven't quite seen the map recently about where all the fires are at. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later in the discussion portion. Um, Another one that I think is really important to be aware about, as far as parasitic fungi, are the entomopathogenic fungi or entomopatho. Oh my gosh, I said it once and I can't do it again. But they're these fungi that eat insects. Um, oh, I even put it a pronunciation guide. Entomophoropathogenec. Um, One of the popular ones and the one that I have pictured here is the cordyceps fungi. And if you go check on our YouTube channel, you can check out when William Padilla Brown, one of the foremost cordyceps experts in the United States, came in and kind of talked about what he does a little bit. Um, but so the cordyceps fungi gets into the insect and takes it over, digests it, and then and pops it out, pops the little mushroom out, and spreads the spores that way. But one use for these fungi that I think uh, can help in us in the gardens, and something also we need to be aware of when we're in our gardens looking for things, are these fungi that attack insects that we find as pests, like wasps, or potentially any other uh, insects that are harming our vegetables, or things that we are trying to protect in the garden, because we can use these fungi to deter um, the insects that we want, and they're highly co-evolved with these with those insects, meaning that they are very species specific, meaning they won't target um, other insects that they're not evolved to target. So why that's important for gardening is because we use tons of insecticide every year that harm pollinators, and most famously the honeybees, which is which is really really tied to economics. But it affects all those the pollinators species when we use those chemicals to that are very broad spectrum, and there's not really a way to make them less broad spectrum. So, but these entomopathogenic fungi are very species specific, sometimes that to the point where they won't even affect other organisms in the genus, and you would have to like train them like you do uh, to train them to get used to that novel substrate in order for them to start to attack them. And also fungal pathogens on animals, like on our skin with like ringworm, which is actually a fungus, or athlete's foot, which are really common fungi. But another one is Batrachochytridium dendrobatus, which is a chytrid uh, fungi, which is a very interesting, very basal on the evolutionary tree branch of fungi that actually still have their flagella, and they can swim around and stuff in their spore stage. They're pretty fascinating little organisms, but getting more into them is outside the scope of this talk tonight, even though they do live in the soils. Um, Fungi also attack other fungi and break them down, and then I have a picture of that doing right here, taken by my lovely partner Allie Stone. Um, in Oregon somewhere. I don't really have much more information other than they're common, and even when you find mold on your stuff, they're kind of going after that. But these will go. The parasites, in my mind, go after specifically living things, whereas the molds are breaking down stuff. And then there are predatory fungi. Like I said, there are some that can uh, attack attack us, especially if a human has an immune deficiency. But there are also fungi that trap nematodes, oyster mushrooms being one of them. Um, and they do that through various means. Some of them grow little rings where they trap where the nematode like swims through it, and then they grow around it. Um, and they usually have some sort of chemical. They exude some sort of like pheromone or chemical to kind of attract it to. Then there is also mutualistic lifestyles. That's another important branch of the fungal ecology. Cultivation and domestication is encouraging other organisms to, or completely letting other organisms assist in your reproduction and your care. So humans have a mutualistic relationship with fungi because we cultivate them. We've been eating them for a long time. But carpenter ants, which are another one that we're going to come across in the garden, mainly because they're defoliate our favorite little plants, um, usually pretty shockingly just overnight, and we see a line of the leaves being carried away. Well, they're actually taking those bits of leaves that they then chew up and spit back out and to feed to a mycelial network and a mat. And you can see them here in this photo caring for this mat, um, and cultivating it. And they also cultivate bacteria to help fight off bacteria that are detrimental to this fungal mat. Excuse me, drinking some water. Um, and yeah, they care for this. And then when the nest is to a size where it can reproduce and split off, and they make another queen, and she does her thing, um, the ants take a bit of this mycelial mat with them, and they take it, and start a whole new nest based around it, and they cultivate it. So this fungi doesn't produce, at least when I learned about them, I didn't know about them actually producing any reproductive spores, because I guess the conditions aren't right for them or anything like that. So they don't form mushrooms. They just rely solely on their these ants to evolve. Um, and like I said, humans have this mutualistic fungi because we cultivate them and hunt them. This is Allie holding couple of uh, lion's mane that we found here in actually outside of Bryan College Station, Texas, in December, I guess, like 4 years ago now. I don't know. That was visiting my parents for Christmas, and we were spotted those from the side of the road. It was pretty exciting. Um, so keep an eye out. Yeah, but like I said, we like to cultivate them and we forage for them, and we've done that for a really long time, and they're a crucial part of human beings' survival throughout our evolutionary history. Another really important mutualistic lifestyle are the Lycanistic fungi, which we had a really great guest lecture last month about that. So go check that out on our YouTube channel for more information on lichens. Um, and they incorporate a photosynthetic partner inside the fungus, and then they have their whole life cycle. And these fungi are really important for actually doing some of the groundwork. Um, this is actually a question that I want to answer going back from Facebook. The ants, they eat the fungi. Um, yeah, so they're eating that. They bring the leaves back there, and then they cultivate the mycelium off that, and they eat it, and that's what they use to eat. Um, yeah. So okay, back to the lichens. Yeah, a little bit about lichens. Are they are some of the primary decomposers of the minerals that they exist on, and also like as they kind of they exude their chemicals to take up some of the phosphorus and some of the minerals that are inside um, inside the rocks themselves. They also die and flake off in the wind, and they kind of become a part of that natural process of building the soil that way. As the wind and water also break off bits of rock that become smaller bits of aggregate that turn into soil. Um, Another really interesting mutualistic lifestyle um, for plants uh, is the the endophytic fungi, and they live completely with inside the tissues of plants, and they are either neutral or beneficial to the growth of the plants themselves, either uh, producing some like anti-pathogen, insecticidal chemical to kind of discourage predation from plants or even mammals. Some people hypothesize that these fungi are responsible for the medicinal qualities of the plants themselves, and they are certainly a newer area of study, and that I certainly would like to learn more about them, and hopefully have someone come give a lecture for the society on them, and just about them, and share all their amazingness with everybody. Some more mutualistic lifestyles are the mycorrhizal fungi. Um, which mycorrhizal is a symbiosis with plant roots. Myco being the Greek word for mushroom, rhizal being, I'm pretty sure it's the Greek word for root. Um, and so there are two types of mycorrhizal fungi. There's the ectomycorrhizal fungi that form a mycelial sheath on the outside of the tree root, and then and those produce fungi, or not fungi. They produce mushrooms, like I pictured here. This beautiful Amanita muscaria that we took a picture of in, I believe, Colorado. But yeah, all the amanitas, they have this ectomycorrhizal relationship, but there's a lot of it's very common. Russulas, a lot, yeah, just like I can't. There's too many to name off the top of my head because I didn't do that type of the research for this talk tonight. Um, but they're really important. Another ectomycorrhizal fungi that people might be familiar with are truffles. Uh, and then another really, and this is probably my favorite uh, type of fungi, are the endomycorrhizal fungi, and they form a structure on the inside of the root, which is an important site for nutrient exchange. Um, these are these fungi are probably some of the most important fungi on the planet. And that's obviously up to debate, but these are basically why plants can grow in the soil. Not 100%, but they contribute significantly to that. 95% of plants form this mutual relationships with endomycorrhizal fungi. Um, and oftentimes they will form relationships with many different kinds of these fungi, which also enables us to use them from commercial inoculums. These fungi are important for helping with nutrient uptake as they kind of exchange minerals and water from the soil. So they break down carbon, or they're an important. I'll get into this a little bit later, but they break down minerals and they exchange them with the plants for carbon. So they're doing they have a trade system going on there. So yeah, we're gonna and so as we talk about this, we need to kind of talk about sorry, let me get my wits about me. um, so we've kind of gone over the basics of fungi and where they live in the ecosystem. So we're going to kind of back out and like talk about the context of these ecosystems, and that's going to kind of lead into talking about soil, and then we'll get into how we can actually use these things um, to help our plants grow, and also kind of help do something about climate change too. So I'm not, we're all familiar with the water cycle. Um, I would hope we'd all be familiar with the water cycle, but if we're not, I'll go over it briefly here. And here's obviously an image of it. But so we have water that evaporates from oceans, lakes, and streams that then goes up into the atmosphere and condenses around the spores um, and dust particles. Um, and eventually, when it reaches enough, it comes down in the form of precipitation, either in snow or rain, and it comes down and it runs off and it enters the groundwater or it ends up back in the ocean. Um, yeah, so it's really important for life. And obviously, there is when the groundwater includes aquifers, both deep and shallow. Um, and if you, as Central Texans know, we have a lot of shallow water aquifers, the Edwards Aquifer, the Trinity Aquifer, that are these quick recharge, relatively quick. Quick in geological terms means like they'll fill up in like 150 to 1,000 years kind of thing, whereas like aquifers like the Ogallala take like 10,000 years for new water to enter that system. So very different. Um, so yeah, as yeah, sorry, kind of lost my train of thought. So yeah, it's important that we know about like, and also, I don't know, trying to bring this in. The This water cycle is impacted by the quality of the soil. So if there is bare soil that we get in like tillage agricultural systems, which dominate our agricultural systems, they are it increases. There's an increase in runoff, and that in that runoff carries with it topsoil. Uh, that ends up as like silt and aggregate, um, and that clogs waterways. But also in these tillage agricultural systems, it carries a lot of the salt fertilizers and the salts that are in the pesticide that are the pesticides, and it carries that out into the groundwater or excuse me into the lakes or into the streams. So building and a healthy soil not only helps reduce our dependence on those types of agricultural inputs, but it also keeps that makes our waterways much cleaner and keeps our topsoil from eroding. Um, so obviously we are familiar, and I really hope we're familiar with the dilemma in our carbon cycle and the imbalance in the carbon cycle, um, uh, the imbalance in the carbon cycle that is leading to massive climate change on the planet. Um, so the carbon cycle kind of has two bits to it. There's a short carbon cycle, which is, kind of based on photosynthesis and us, animals taking up that photosynthesis via eating it and then respiring. Um, as we well, hold on, I'll get into the eating it later. So plants also respire, so they bring in uh, CO2 and they give it off. Um, but so yeah they so they bring down CO2, and they put it in the soil. They use that, and they use that sugar that they make through photosynthesis, and they exchange it with the fungi in the soil, and I'll get into a little bit later how that all works. Um, so yeah, but another important aspect of the carbon cycle actually happens in the oceans, which is why we need to fix our on land um, inputs in order to mitigate some of these issues that are going on in the ocean, which is not will not only be which won't solely be solved via uh, what we're talking about here, because we really if sorry, I'm getting like way out ahead of myself. So a lot of the oxygen that we breathe is actually produced in the oceans by photosynthetic algae. And if the algae are don't have the right temperature and the proper pH, they're not able to carry out this photosynthesis. And so the collapse of our oceans uh, is actually has a profound effect on our ability to breathe in the future. Um, so it's really important that we not only reduce the waste, reduce the chemicals that run off from our broken carbon cycle, but we also um, you know, keep the warming from happening in order to actually keep the oceans at the level to where they can actually photosynthesize like that. One of the first massive extinction events on this planet was from a type of atmospheric change that came from the oceans, where it actually became predominantly oxygen, um, and killed off all the anaerobic organisms that thrived in an in a low oxygen environment. Another important aspect of our soil ecology is the nitrogen cycle, which where the atmospheric nitrogen is taken up by photosynthetic or not photosynthetic nitrogen fixing bacteria, which makes its way into the plants, which then is eaten and by animals and is broken, as well as the roots of those plants being broken down directly by decomposers in the soil, and fixing bacteria also fix nitrogen in the soil. Um, And then another important nutrient cycle, which I kind of touched on, is the phosphorus cycle, which in industrial agriculture, our phosphorus comes from basically phosphorus mines, one of the first ones, which is also one of the first kind of like peak resource situations, if you will, was the Guano Islands, and actually caused some conflicts, but they would go and mine these islands that were basically these rocks in the ocean that were just covered in bird poop, and they would go and they would harvest that for the guano because it was very phosphorus rich. And so a lot of our industrial agriculture is based on having this phosphorus input. But we don't actually need to have this input, because the problem with our soils being deficient in phosphorus isn't that the phosphorus isn't there, it's that it's not bioavailable. So by repairing the biological relationships in the soil, we can make that carbon, which is there in the parent material of the rocks, be available to the plants that we are trying to grow, as you know, which makes that be available to us, and as well as the other organisms that live among us. So this next slide is kind of like how we kind of tell what type of soil we're working with. And I just put this up here to kind of bring it into what people might uh, be familiar. I didn't know people used to get kidnapped and left on those islands, but yeah, they are just like out in the middle of the ocean where birds would gather, and that would be about the only thing I could see how that would be a pretty nasty place to get left. um, anyway, so this image is just kind of like how we tell what kind of soil we have, a real quick and easy test to tell what kind of soil it is you have based, and how you tell what kind of soil you have based upon this chart is by a ratio of the different particles. Um, and the quickest way, lowest, cheapest way to tell what you have in your garden is to just take a good, healthy scoop of soil and put that in a jar with some water that enough to cover it, shake it up, and let it all settle out, and that'll kind of give you a rough estimate of your of of the type of soil that you have. And you can go into more detail, and I highly recommend getting your soils tested, especially if you're trying to do this on a you need to be more precise about what you're doing. Like if you're a farmer, or a market gardener or something like that, and you want to know how to get the best plants as quickly as possible, you'll still want to be doing some inputs, but just know what you need to be inputting in your soil. Don't just like be guessing. Like go ahead and take the time and the effort to get a soil test and get some recommendations in the chat. We have a recommendation. University of Delaware has a good soil testing program. Um, yeah, I'm sure like every state agency, land grant university has like a agricultural extension office that works with the USDA, and they can also plug you into resources too. Um, I know it can be kind of good to work with local people for some of that stuff. But yeah, anywhere, look around for what kind of tests people do. Yes, A&M does have a soil testing program, but look around for what kind of tests people do, because some people will also kind of start to tell you, are starting to do kind of more of the biological tests, which we're going to be getting more into later about why that's important. But knowing about what kind of soils you have will dictate kind of the plants that you want to grow. So this is kind of important on a more macro level as far as gardening is concerned. Like you want to look at the climate that you're working with, as well as like soil types, like is it clay soils, and will is the plant that I want to grow, does it grow well in a clay soil or sandy soil? What about pH, stuff like that? And a lot of that is going to be based on the parent material that goes into build soils. But here you have a map of the bioregions, and then here's the soil map. And if you kind of toggle between the two, you can see roughly how they correlate, where um, in this big tan section right here, you have the Blackland Prairie. And on this soil map right here in the gray, you have the Blackland Prairie. And you can kind of see how those shapes correspond. Um, and then if you go right next to it, you'll see a different soil type. And that corresponds, oops, wrong way on the slideshow. That corresponds to the Oak Woods and Prairies bioregion in Texas, which is this one right here next to the tan. So that can be important when we talk about dealing. We need to know the context that we're working with, and some of the large scale limitations of our environment. The climatic features on the scales of permanence, how much precipitation we're getting, that kind of stuff. And that's when that's just like basic studying of ecology right there. That's how we know what grew when in the fossil record and such. Excuse me, I need to get a little sip of something because I'm talking a lot. So that's all the physical components of the soil, but that is we're starting to understand kind of takes uh, is less, it's important to know about and important to be aware of, but we can kind of get over some of those limitations, especially around like what inputs we need to be using if we start to focus on building a very healthy soil ecology, and which is called the soil food web, um, which if you look up Dr. Elaine Ingham, she is probably the foremost leading scientist of talking about the soil food web. Really kind of did a lot of the groundbreaking research into this. I highly recommend checking out her work. She's got tons of lectures on YouTube. She's got a channel. I think uh, her business is actually one. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But if you just search for her, you'll find it. But their business is one that you can consult if you want to kind of send them a snapshot of the Dr. Elaine Ingham is her name. Yeah, but she can kind of help you do an analysis of the biology in your soil. Oh yeah, thank you for putting that in the chat there. And if someone could do that on the Facebook chat, that'd be awesome. So yeah, basically the soil food web, though, it starts with plants. So if they are the engine that drives the whole thing because they are the primary source of carbon in the whole system through where they make the sugars through photosynthesis that they use not only to grow and carry out their life cycles, but what they use to exchange with the fungi. Um, Also, as they grow, the plants are constantly shedding bits of root material. As they grow throughout the year, as they lengthen throughout the soil, they shed root hairs, things like that. Thank you, Adam. The So and all that organic matter turns into waste residue that feeds on bacteria and fungi, and these bacteria and fungi, they're the second layer of this soil food web, outside the plants and the dead organic matter that comes from not only the plant itself but from dead fungus, bits of fungus that fall off, bacteria, and the fungus and the bacteria are also eating each other in this process too. Nematodes feed on roots. They're another one of these primary decomposers. Um, and, and I'm sure, termites and things, you can probably consider those some of these primary decomposers, but usually they're a symptom of some other imbalance in the system. Um, but not always. There are definitely naturally occurring parts of life. Which brings us to arthropods, which are very, very important aspects of the soil food web. And they're kind of the engines that keep everything going. Like on one of those days or one of those evenings when I was out in the backyard stargazing, which some people might catch on to what's going on there. But yeah, listening to the birds chirp, or not the birds chirp, the insects chirping and the crickets singing and whatnot. It's like it kind of occurred to me that if they'd stop doing what they're doing because of their role in their keystone role in the soil food web here, as far as like breaking down bits of fungi and bacteria, um, that if they weren't doing that, then we wouldn't be able to live. And so we really owe them a lot of thanks for their singing. Um, Then we also have fungal eating nematodes and that eat bacteria, nematodes that eat bacteria and fungi, as well as protozoa, which are like pre-animals, as well as like metazoa, which are like very microscopic little organisms. But these are like amoeba, other flagellates, ciliates. They they are eating bacteria and fungi. Very, very interesting little organisms. A good YouTube channel for that. I'll plug them, even though we have no affiliation with them. CTMS doesn't, and I don't personally. But the Microcosmos is really cool for a lot of protozoa and metazoa microscopy. They also talk on bacteria and they touch a little bit on fungi. But highly recommend checking them out for some really beautiful videos uh, that are educational. Um, Yeah, and so as you can see from this graphic here, that it just goes up the scale. Larger arthropods eat smaller arthropods, and these arthropods are eaten by larger animals like birds and mammals. We are a mammal. We eat the fungi. We eat from these plants. So we are also a member of this soil food web. We eat animals. We eat along all aspects of this soil food web. Even when we eat fermented foods, we're eating bacteria and fungi and relying on them to kind of break down some of our food. Yes, we very much are animals, and I, for one, like love to think of us that way, and also love to think of us like I'm. A little bit about my background. I'm a psychologist. That's what my bachelor's degree is in, and and so I very much do try to look at it from an outsider perspective, which is an impossible task, being that I am a human being and in fact not a Martian. Um, but so here we have a kind of a lo-fi image of kind of how all this fits together. So we have the plants here, they're growing, they're putting the carbon down into the soil here and through the fungi, and those bits of fungi as well as bacteria, they kind of start to glue the bits of uh, soil aggregate together to actually form like a structure that is that not only allows for air exchange but for water to infiltrate, uh, and that infiltration is what we're looking for and reducing runoff and stuff like that. Um, the glue that they use is the glomulin, um, or is the glue that binds this all together is called glomulin. It's a protein. Um, yeah, Journey to the Microcosmos is the channel. Sorry to break away and answer a question from the chat, but yeah, Journey to the Microcosmos is great. Um, So the fungi, they exude this chemical. It's a very complex biological bioprotein that is chock full of carbon. And so some scientists have hypothesized, um, and when by hypothesized, they mean they're making a very educated guess about this being a potential source for us to kind of sequester some of the carbon that we are putting into the atmosphere. Um, and another important point that I forgot to mention about the endomycorrhizal fungi is they don't have the septa that allows them to be broken and able to survive and regrow and things like that. So they are very fragile to soil disturbance. Um, and so where this kind of starts to matter is when we look at this graphic here, which I can't remember the actual source, and I should have wrote it down, and I'll fix that for future presentations. But here we have like a projection of the heating in Texas that's gonna that will potentially occur over the next 100 years or whatever. And we're in 2020 now. We kind of see how bad the summer temperatures were. We're coming out of summer now, and so we all experienced more or less how this was going to be. Um, and this is a shocking graphic of degree days over 100, or the summer temperature, which so it's like the average of the highs for the whole summer. So it's not looking good. But if we start to repair these soil ecosystems, we can improve infiltration. Uh, uh, actually, I need to point out that Texas is go back a little bit. That Texas is predominated by grasslands. Most of this area right here in the middle, and actually all the way down into here and along the coastlines here, all of this is grasslands that is now either overgrazed or in some sort of tillage agriculture. Out here we have the desert, which also used to be there's aspects of that which are desert grasslands, which have a similar dynamics as these grasslands over here. Just what differentiates them are precipitation amounts. So that's important when we start to back out a little bit more and look at this on a continent-wide scale. So right here, we see all of North America, a huge section of that in North America, that is also grasslands. Up into, all this in here is grassland. Starting up into here, you start to get into more forested areas. Over here, you have the Rocky Mountains, which leads into forest, but any of the stuff in between, that's like desert. Desert ecosystems are very complex, as and very different than the grasslands. But grasslands do play a large role in some of these. These desert grasslands do play a role in here, and so they have some of the similar dynamics, especially around holding together soil aggregate, the importance of plants growing there, to be to kind of be an engine for the soil food web and building healthy soils. But these healthy soils improve the hydrological dynamics of these ecosystems. That porous soil acts as a sponge, and so it actually raises the humidity of these ecosystems, and that can lead to less extreme rain events, like meaning that it doesn't dump all at once. It kind of is spread out over a longer period of time and isn't so extreme. It's buffered a little bit. Same thing when the water that does fall hits the soil. When it hits a a a a, a, a surface that is covered in plants and decaying plant material, that it acts as a buffer that keeps soil from being picked up by the water and washing away. And it and like I mentioned earlier, it increases infiltration, and which is important for slowing that runoff, which is important for mitigating floods and flash flooding and things like that. Here's another picture of the soil food web. Um, so here is a picture, and I can't remember this guy's name. He's a soil researcher, and he's standing there with some tall grass prairies standing next to him. He's holding it. You can see the root system next to him that is taller than him. Uh, and you can see how deep it goes, and they have a little cutout section of the soil right there, a little dugout section. And you can see, and the picture is not that great. If you just like Google tall man with tall grass roots next to him, you'll find it. I promise I'll do better about having these easier to find for everybody in the future. Um, but you can see in the original of this image how deep the plants are growing and the one that he's holding are compared to the annual row cropping that they have in the other one. Very shallow root systems. They don't have uh, much infiltration at all. So you can see how very quickly that the soil can become a deep sponge, especially in these ecosystems that that are grasslands that thrive and that are where these native prairie species called themselves home. Um, so yeah, here and so like you had large swaths of the northern hemisphere that were covered in these tall grass prairies. Um, millions of bisons, robust civilizations living off of these ecosystems. And in fact, that they wouldn't, the whole, how the US government was able to slow down and just completely take the wind out of like the Lakota and, like tribes rebellions during the Indian Wars, um, was by going after their food source, the bison, and taking that. And by breaking that linkage, they were able to then, break the resistance of those people and, subjugate those nations even further. Um, and until now, where we have a land use structure in the United States that looks like this. Um, where it is either in uh, pasture agriculture that doesn't necessarily protect the integrity of the soil ecosystem, or it is in tillage agriculture growing livestock feed. As you can see right here where I'm circling is livestock feed. Over here, um, food feed exports, that's all livestock feed. Ethanol, wheat, you know over here, wheat exports, that is all tillage agriculture. Tobacco, tillage agriculture. Corn syrup production, tillage agriculture. Maple syrup is not, that's coming from trees. Barley, all of any time that there are these broadacre annual agricultural um, these broadacre agricultural plots, they are using tillage agriculture. Um, Over here in California, where a lot of our vegetables and fruits come from, they are also using the very tillage agriculture when they're annuals. And if they're not predominantly, the industry doesn't use holistic soil methods. So you can incorporate a lot of the techniques that I'm about to get into like garden your trees, or and around in your annual gardens and stuff like that. So like, or if you were an orchardist or you owned an orchard, you could use these to take care of your trees and mitigate the inputs that you have to put into it. And I know, like, I'm pretty optimistic about the ability of soil to kind of solve all these problems. But I do think it's important to point out that, like, I only bring this up to in this large context to kind of help maybe frame it for people to what they can kind of talk about and maybe organize around politically, is because, like, those are the largest barriers to implementing this, is like, the subsidies for corn agriculture and things like that, and those types of economic engines that keep these things driving. And so, like, what we can do as, like, citizens is kind of advocate for helping get money to farmers to so they can switch over to this type of agricultural system, to like a no tillage agricultural system that cares about fungi and the soil food web and cultivating that. But because, like, when farmers learn about this through the USDA programs, oftentimes they are not able to make that change, or they are so tied into the cycles of the current economy that it's risky for them to make a change. And I think we as people who want to advocate for this kind of stuff need to be aware of that, and trying to advocate in a way that makes it possible for these people to not feel like they are responsible, because even though they might be the ones that are carrying out the individual action, they are very much at the whims of, like, a system that they are embedded within, that finances them, that puts food on their table. So I think it's when we try and talk about farmers and get farmers to change, we need to kind of have that compassionate mindset and understand, like, that they are people at the whims of an economic system that they largely don't have much control over, because their funding comes from the banks. So let's get into some stuff that we can do in our backyard to connect ourselves with the soil food web, with the fungi that live uh, in it with us, and also incorporate some fungi into our vegetable garden spaces. So right here, I have a lovely image that I made in MS Paint that goes over how to make a garden, a mushroom bed for your garden. It's very, very simple. The first thing you're going to want to do is get yourself some mycelium, some mushroom spawn. You can purchase a 5-pound block from Mini, a great mushroom purveyor, like I'm drawing a blank. There's so many great ones out there. Someone in the chat, help me out. Let's see. Fungi Perfecti sells the stuff. Mycorrhizal, Mushroom Mountain. Thank you. That was the one that was, like, on the tip of my tongue, but it sounded wrong in my head for some reason. But yeah, Mushroom Mountain. Yeah, if you just look for uh, Hyphae Mycology, I don't know. You can contact them or get with us, and we will pick up mycelium blocks from them, spent ones from them from some time. They donate to us. So, like, if you can get with us and the people out at the Circle Acres Research Station, they can help you get some blocks too, to do this. So once you got your mushroom spawn, which a 25-pound block will kind of will make about a 25-foot square bed. You can either make a um, a uh, sorry, distracted by the chat here, which I totally want y'all to do, but I'm gonna have to get used to doing this. You can make either like a square patch or a long, 2 by 12.5 foot path that kind of fits it. You can basically get creative with your arrangement of this. Is what I'm basically saying. You're more than likely going to want to find hardwood mulch, and what I mean by hardwood, I mean, like, avoid things that are like pine or juniper, and some people even say, well, okay, hold on. Softwoods are like pines and junipers, and you want to avoid them because they're aromatic and stuff like that. Um, Hardwoods refer to things like oaks. Um, Around here, I'm going to just talk about trees from around here, like oaks and hackberries and mulberries, things like that. That don't have really high resinous wood. They don't grow cones. They don't grow pine. They don't have needles. Yeah, so those are the kind of things you're going to want to avoid. And things like that have um, chemicals in them that don't. Yeah, the Bodark mulberry. Uh, oh yeah, that's a type of mulberry. I'm drawing a blank. No, it's not. I should know this. I do trees professionally. I should be better about this. But you want to avoid things like walnuts. Yeah, the Osage orange. I love those trees. They're beautiful. Um, and they used to use them for fences, and they got big spines, and they got good flexible wood for doing, and it's beautiful orange wood too. But I'm getting distracted again. So yeah, you want to get things like oak and stuff like that, and obviously it can be hard sometimes to know what's in your mulch, especially if you're getting it dumped from like an arborist or something like that. Um, but as long as you can tell that it's not like 100% ash juniper, uh, then you're more than likely going to be good. And the ash juniper mulch is like bright orange and it smells like when you're walking in the hill country. You're going to want to put your bed somewhere not in the direct sun because that'll just cause it to dry out. Um, uh, yeah, it'll cause it to dry out, and you kind of want to, and you also want to irrigate this regularly, especially during the summer months. Um, so someone asked what type of mushrooms can be grown this way. The best kind, one of the most popular kind is the garden giant, the Strophoria rugosa annulata, and in fact, one of the reasons why it's the most popular to do this way is because it requires like a more complex ecosystem in order to make fruits. It needs like a trigger from a bacterial consortium, which is just a word for a bunch of different species of bacteria all together. But it needs that consortium to trigger the pins to, and then that then could turn into fruits. But you could use, but any mushroom that is fruiting outside can be done this way. Oyster mushrooms can be, you can make oyster mushroom beds, chestnut fungi, which is just another type of culinary fungi, the Foliota adiposa, which is the Latin name for that one. But excuse me. But how you build these little buggers is you dig down a little bit to kind of use the soil, the surrounding soil as some insulation. Um, and that'll kind of help keep the water in there uh, a little bit longer. You're going to want to dig down 6 inches. You're going to put down like a layer of cardboard, and you can wet this if you want to. Actually, I would recommend wetting this. So you put this layer of cardboard down, and that just kind of like acts as a little barrier between anything that's like existing in the soil that might jump up into your little area that you're trying to give your mycelium a head start on. And then you're going to want to put down a layer of wood chips, and you want to soak these wood chips overnight so they're chock full of moisture. You can just like put them in like a pillowcase or a burlap sack and soak them in preferably rainwater, but if whatever water you have will work. Um, yeah, so you put down a layer of wood chips, and then you'll sprinkle in a layer of your mushroom spawn, and then you'll just repeat steps 3 through 4 until you run out of spawn. And then you'll cover your last layer will be a layer of wood chips, and then you can cover that with an optional layer of straw to kind of help seal in all the moisture and add an extra layer of sun protection to it all. And then yeah, just kind of let it do its thing. You can check on it, try not to disturb it too much, but check on it to make sure the mycelium's growing. You'll see it. Um, you'll see it kind of take over. And yeah, when the conditions are right, you'll get a flush of mushrooms. So you'll want to be on the look for that. Usually around here, that'll be in the fall, kind of in the spring. But I've had them after a summer rain pop up from mushroom blocks that I've had it out in the garden. Um, uh, so yeah, you just kind of always want to be checking on your mushroom bed and make sure you're not missing anything that could be coming out good. And you can go ahead and build these right in among your plants, because they have a symbiotic effect. They can be, you can kind of view these as like companion plantings, if you will, because as they go, they break down the wood, they're adding to the soil food web. Organisms come up into this. Earthworms love eating the mycelium, and they carry that out, and they kind of act as like a refuge. And they bring that, you know, into other aspects of your garden, and that active biology helps them grow, helps your plants grow, um, and as well, and you know, and you can kind of get creative with this too. Like if you check out our log inoculation video on our channel, on the YouTube channel, um, you could do that and then just bury the log. So what you could do is take another species you could do that with is we used shiitake in that video, but if you wanted to, you could use some reishi. A quick answer to this question in the chat: do you leave the bed year round? Uh, yeah, you can. You'll leave it year round, and after it fruits, actually, you want to feed it. And if you know that conditions are about to be getting ready to be right, like if it's starting to come into fall, you actually want to not feed it and you want to let it kind of starve for a little bit, because that's how you get the fruit. If there's no reason for it to put off spores, it won't do that. um, but so another way to kind of incorporate fungi into your garden, like I was, to go back to what I was talking about before I answered that question, um, was to is to inoculate a log with some, say, like a reishi mushroom, and then bury that log. And that log will, whenever it's right, it'll fruit reishi mushrooms, and you can kind of have like a special little flower in the garden that you can harvest, um, if you so choose, or you'll get really cool uh, fruits you can um, uh, that you can show off on Instagram or whatever. So talk about logs for a second. Um, Talk to arborists. That'll be a great source for logs. What you're going to be looking for is something that's, and this is also covered in the log inoculation video, but something that's like around 4 to 6 inches in diameter. You don't want anything like super massive, that's hard to carry around, or anything that's like too long. But if you're working with an arborist, that they probably won't be cutting anything too long. But you want to be able to go pick it up from them like pretty much while they're working, because usually those people are working with chippers, and they just, you know, it's faster for them to mulch it down and get rid of it that way. Cutting your own logs, if you have the space, can be good too. Obviously, you want to do that in a way that doesn't hurt the trees, and like also if you can think about it strategically, where you don't have to cut down a whole tree in order to make your mushroom logs, um, that would be the best. As far as starting your mushroom beds, I would recommend, like, you can start them in the spring, but I would recommend starting them like now in the fall, because you're going to have those cool weather, potentially a good dose of rain for them to like really set off their growth and kind of help them grow. And yeah, the cool temperatures will really help out with that. And then you'll be probably getting mushrooms you know, maybe in the end of the fall, or at the end of the winter, beginning of the spring, like that. But like I said, if you take care of them, they'll keep coming back. You'd be surprised; they're pretty resilient. Even if they dry out, um, a good dose of rain will wake them up. We just had some blocks that we didn't even really make a bed with it. We just kind of crumpled up and used it as like a mulch, just on the surface. And the more thick chunks, they just fruited in with the recent rains in the front yard. So thinking about the timing of the year and trying to correlate that, excuse me, and hiccuping, trying to correlate that with the broader mushroom season would be what I would recommend. When feeding the beds means giving them more. So what do I mean when I say feed the beds? I mean by giving them more mulch. Um, worrying about any pests. So yeah, outdoor mushroom beds, you're gonna get insects that are gonna come to your mushrooms and eat them. That's just kind of the name of the game. Like that's already happening with the mushrooms that we forage. So you kind of get to take your pick about what's too far gone. But that's like one reason why you want to be checking them regularly to kind of get out ahead of anything like that. But also, if there's beetles on it, you can kind of shake them off. I don't know. Yeah, you can leave that up to your discretion, and it's not always the worst thing to eat a bug or two. That's my opinion. Any more questions on mushroom beds? Yeah, exactly. Extra protein. Um, yeah, and you can kind of get away with doing some lesser in depth, like if you just wanted to kind of put down some cardboard. You don't have to dig down. You can build up on the soil surface and among your plants too. Um, you can do that, all that too. You can kind of, just once you get a feel for it, just play around with it, and just like with anything else in gardening, the world is your oyster mushroom. Um, so another important aspect for incorporating fungi into the garden is inoculating your plants with mycorrhizal fungi. So some general rules of thumb with doing that is it's better to inoculate your plants earlier, uh, sooner than the earlier the better. So like some people, you can even buy seeds that are like with the seed coating where it includes these mycorrhizal fungi already into it. But if you don't want to spring for the cash for that, you can just uh, dust the roots of your seedlings, or dip your or just do like mix the spores into some water and do a soil drench that way. um, Also, you want to make sure your soil substrates don't have fertilizers already in them, because too much fertilizer the plant is just like, well, why would I need to make friends with this fungi here? There's plenty of bioavailable nutrients in my substrate already, in the soil around me, in my roots already, so I'm not going to do that. Um, so it's important to kind of like to get your plant started off right with the relationships to its ecosystem partners, as opposed to relying on the industrial inputs from uh, the capitalist agricultural system. Um, Even though I do recommend buying uh, the bioorganics is a reputable spore supplier, and they have OMRI listed products. So if you're an organic USDA organic farmer and you need to have inputs that are organic certified, here is a good source for them. Bioorganics. They also have a more broad spectrum landscape one that has a little bit more to it, but that's also that. But that is not OMRI listed. But highly recommend them. But if you don't want to do that, if you can also cultivate native mycorrhizal species by going out and taking some wild soil and grow and putting that into your potting mix, and growing some annual plants with the potting mix, and then taking that, drying that out, separating out the roots from that, and that becomes your inoculum for the future. If you check out the Rodale Institute, they have the protocols for doing this. If you're a farmer or a precocious gardener who wants to kind of take on a project like that, I know I would like to do that as far with the society, because it's kind of something I've always been curious about and trying, and um, and that we want to do as to incorporate some um, a wild mycorrhizal variable into some mycorrhizal agricultural research we would hope to take care of in the future. Um, from the Facebook chat, it's saying if you use mycorrhizal um, supplements, it's highly recommended that you don't use sulfur. That is, well, because sulfur is actually antifungal. Um, in fact, that's kind of a common thing that they'll use if you're having like a problem with fungus in your ecosystem is you'll put out sulfur. So what crops that you don't want to waste your spores on though, because like I said earlier, 95% of fungi of plants associate with mycorrhizal fungi. Well, there are 5% that don't. And these are usually the early pioneer species that come into an ecosystem when it's recently disturbed, and so the soils themselves are very low in organic matter, very low in structure, very high in bacteria, and these plants don't associate with them. So broadly, you don't want to use any inoculate anything from the Brassicaceae family, which is like your broccoli, your cabbage, your kales. Anything that that is Brassica oleracea is basically don't waste your precious inoculum that costs you a lot of money um, on with that. And also spinach, anything in the Amaranthaceae family, which is like spinach, beets, and culinary amaranth. You don't want to waste your inoculum on that either, because it's not going to make those associations. It's just a waste of your time. But if you anything else is good to go. So apple trees, rose bushes, tomatoes. Um, those are the only things that are coming to mind right now. But you get the point. And then another important one that I didn't have in the slide because I really haven't done enough research into it to do it justice. And hopefully we'll have actually a farmer who does practice these things come in and um, talk about them in a little bit in the future is no-till agriculture, which is a system of agriculture that it it focuses on cultivating soil and uses specific implements, especially on broad scale, um, that enable people to plant through what is essentially a layer of mulch. So I guess I'll just explain the process real quick. Is you start with like a cover crop. Um, Basically, the idea is to never have any bare soil, which is happens in a tillage agriculture. So, one way to accomplish this is to use cover crops, and you can use cover. You can do a lot of this scaled down in your garden. You just won't be using like tractor implements to do it. You'll just be like using maybe a line trimmer or something and a board to like crimp. So basically, what you do is you grow your a cover crop for in your off season, and that helps keep it covered. Um, that helps keep the soil covered, uh, from the erosion and whatnot. And at a certain point, like before they go to seed, you what you'll do is you actually go down, and when they use when they do this on a large scale, on like a broad acre scale, they have like a thing that rolls, and it's called a roller and a crimper, and it basically smashes down the cover crop, which is just like a mixture of seeds that are beneficial for the soil, a lot of nitrogen fixing plants and such. Um, so they come in and they smash it down, and this roller and crimper cuts the plant, so it kills it, and that acts as a mulch. And then they come through and they have a special thing that allows them to drill seeds through the mulch layer and into the soil, um, and that enables them to grow their crops that way. Um, and excuse me. Uh, yeah, so they're able to grow that crop that way, and they are able to grow, relatively conventional style crops. Um, corn, sorghum, cotton, you name it, as far as like industrial commodity agriculture, they're able to do it that way. And there's no reason why it couldn't work in vegetable agriculture too. I know there's people that are starting to do more of that in their vegetable production and things like that. So just and the whole idea is to like cultivate the soil, build organic matter in the soil, and keep it from and and to lower your inputs by shifting the nutrient profile to be in the biology of the soil, as opposed to constantly coming from outside sources. Um, and so, yeah, you can do a similar thing in your gardens. And if you have enough space to kind of incorporate some of that, I mean, I highly recommend it, or even just doing some of that in the off season, getting a mixture of clover and buckwheat and some other things. You just, if you search for cover crop seeds, you'll find this. And anytime you're actively not growing, plants, if you can do this, it would be better than just a mulch. Obviously, I'm speaking about this in ideals, and everyone's context, everyone does the work that's dependent on their context. And another thing we can do that kind of fits into this no-till agriculture is managing our grazing systems that don't damage the soil, making sure that we give the soil time to rest, um, and recover from the damage of being grazed upon. We do some of the cover cropping, some of that kind of stuff. And if you look into like the holistic management, intensive rotational grazing system, that's a pretty good system to kind of get more detail about what I'm talking about there. Um, but and to kind of do that on a more small scale, you can incorporate chickens in your backyard to kind of and rotate them around to just to scratch up a new garden bed to eat your compost, things like that. There's lots of ways to kind of get into that, but some of that might be kind of better covered in a more discussion. So I'm going to get through, like, here are some good sources that I use to kind of put this together. But this presentation together. So Radical Mycology by Peter McCoy is a great book. I highly recommend. That's like where a lot of the stuff that we teach from Central Texas Mycology comes from, as well as the organic mushroom farming and microremediation by Trad Cotter, growing gourmet medicinal mushrooms by Paul Stamets, Soil Food Web by Elaine Ingham, Mycorrhizal Planet by Michael Phillips, the Teaming With series by Jeffrey Lowenfels. I mean, I think y'all can all read. These are just some highly recommended sources that I have for you, and I can put them in the description below so people can reference them. So yeah, we can move into questions now if anybody would like to, but real quick, like, follow us on Central Texas Mycology on Facebook, and at Central Texas Mycology on Instagram, at CTMS Fungi on Twitter, and become a member today. It's only $25. The slide is actually wrong here. I should fix that. It's $25 for single membership, $30 for a family membership, and $50 for a sustaining membership. And that gives you discounts to any workshops that we have in the future, any discounts that we have on any, like, Myco swag that we have as promotional gear for the society. Give you any organizational support with access to tools and resources to hone your technical skills in mycology, which we do a lot over the private Discord server, where we have talks about cultivating fungi, talking about what we've found and what we find in our gardens, talk about our gardens, other things, current events, music that we like. It's just our mushroom community where Central Texans and Texans in general get together and we talk about things. Being a member also gives you access to members only forays, cookouts, camping trips that we organize in the future once COVID kind of is like, beyond us, and any other CTMS members only gatherings that we plan. And if you liked my thoughts, kind of where I was coming at from some of this, if you want to get a little bit more about me personally, you can follow me at Dumpster Jedi with a 3 for the last E on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, and so I'll kind of open it up to questions, and I'm going to stop the screen share so people can see me. So any questions? If not, I can wrap it up and we'll call it an evening here tonight.
I have some show and tell.
Yeah, show us. Let's switch this over on my end. Let's go to the gallery view. So we can see every. Oh, you're muted, Sam.
Sorry. You don't need to share screen. I'm going to just use the camera, but I went foraging today. So I got a few mushrooms and I didn't know if maybe we wanted to do a little show and tell and we could maybe do a little ID like confirmation if anybody's into it. I don't know. I don't know if that goes along with your program today. So I don't want to overstep or.
Sure. We can do that. I'm going to actually in the stream then, because that's a separate thing. But anybody who wants to stick around to do that, then we totally can.
If anybody else wants to, I can wait too. I just jumped in when I had a chance. But if anybody has something related to your presentation, and thank you for that so much, and definitely will be signing up tonight. I've been meaning to throw you all my money anyway, so
sweet. Thank you so
much. I'll
be
doing it tonight, but I can wait. And if when we're done, if anybody wants to see the 5 different kinds of mushrooms I foraged today in about an hour, then just locally, then we can do that. So
yeah, for sure. So if nobody has any questions on about the mush gardening with fungi, soil ecology, anything like that, then I will end the broadcast and we'll move over to the private post game chill session where if you're not a member, you don't get to be part of. Well, actually, you can be a part of it if you just go to the Central Texas Mycology events page. You can join the Zoom link, and yeah, we're gonna get into a little bit of post game mushroom ID. Thanks everybody for joining us on our broadcast tonight, and thank you so much. And join us on October 1st, where we are going to have another Myco hangout with the creators of Fungi Planet. And then in October 15th, we are going to have a mushroom identification lecture with Leah Mycelia. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight on this month's Central Texas Mycology Society monthly guest lecture.